This is the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccerphiles Canada. Welcome to Series 17. We're looking at the squads of the 2023 Gold Cup. This is the full-length version for Mexico's players. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin, and this is Series 17 on the players of the 2023 Gold Cup, and this episode covers Mexico's players. So just a couple of notes before we begin. We have done two runs through players of Mexico. We did the first one for the final round of World Cup qualifying. That was in the fall of 2021. And then we did another run through because they were in the 2022 World Cup. So that one's the most recent one. And I got to tell you, those were mammoth podcasts. And there are three reasons for that. The first one is that Mexico pretty much makes it to every tournament that they enter. So they played a lot of tournaments. Some summers they've had 2 or even 3 tournaments, and they send an A team and a B team and once even a C team. The second reason it was so long is because they have so many players to choose from. So a long, deep pool, a long list of players, a deep pool. I'm mixing my metaphors there. And the third reason is that the players themselves are very experienced. So anyone who's been with the team for, say, 10 or 12 years has 10 or 12 tournaments under their belt, you know, a lot of tournaments. But this time we're kind of determined to keep that shorter. So I'll just say, if you want to go back and get more details, say, on the players, in the individual players' club history or tournament history, we have more of that in the World Cup Players Edition. For this one, we're going to move a little bit faster and kind of focus on the key details. And in fact, that media cast for the World Cup had 2 parts. The first part, we kind of introduced the players and predicted how likely they were to make it. And then in the update podcast, after the final rosters came out, we kind of showed which of the players had and hadn't made it. For this one, we're going to combine it into one media cast, but it is in 2 parts. So the first part we're doing in May, where we kind of list the candidates and predict how likely they are to make it. And then we're going to add on in the same one at the end, which we'll do in June when the final rosters come out. But it'll all be one media cast in Series 17 of our series, of our, what do I call it? Our media cast series, our family of podcasts, whatever you want to call it. So honestly, if you want a shorter version, you can just kind of go to the second part, which will be done in June, to see which of the players made it. Okay, so once again, we're organizing position by position, and we realize this is not always accurate because players move around, but we found it the best way to kind of organize the discussion here. And there's always a few surprises, so we'll cover them as best as we can. And in the second half of the show, we can perhaps update stuff that we didn't know in the first half of the show. Okay, so let's begin by looking at the games that they've played recently. And we're going to begin with the World Cup. So they had 3 games of the World Cup, didn't make it past the group stage for the first time in a long, long time. And they played Poland, which was a 0-0 draw. For that, they used a 4-3-3 formation. In the second game, they faced Argentina, and that was a 0-2 loss, and they used a more defensive formation, which obviously didn't do the trick, a 5-3-2 formation, so 5 at the back and just 2 up front. And in the final game, they played Saudi Arabia and used a 4-2-3-1 formation for that one, so a bit more of an attacking formation. However, they did allow Saudi Arabia a goal, which cost them dearly in that one. After that, in March, they played 2 CONCACAF Nations League games. So the first one was away to Suriname, That was a 2-0 win, and they used a 4-3-3 formation, and that seems to be kind of their default formation, because they used the same at home to Jamaica, which resulted in a 2-2 draw. Now this is all under their new manager. And finally, a kind of an interesting game away in the USA in April, which was a friendly. They used a 3-5-2 formation in that one, and I'll say that they used what seemed pretty close to an A team under the new manager for this one. Although the USA's was clearly a B team, and they were also working under a new manager, and so a 1-1 draw probably pretty disappointing for them there. And that's all that they've done. So just 3 games since the World Cup. So you're going to find as we go through the first part that we're in a bit of doubt as to some of the bigger names who have not played since the World Cup. Are they still on the team or are they not? So I think we can only speculate at this point. But perhaps the games in mid-June, those are the CONCACAF Nations League final games against USA, and then if they pass the final, will shed some light on us, on those players, especially those veterans, to see if they do or if they don't show up. May shed some light on the team they're going to bring to the Gold Cup. There's also the possibility that they'll bring a B team to the Cup, because the A team played in the World Cup, so they may be looking for some rest. However, we think it's a bit less likely that they'll bring a B team than the USA. Okay, anyway, we move on to look at the candidates, and we're going to begin with the manager, and actually the outgoing manager, Gerardo Martino. So he was not kept after the World Cup, and in his place, we have kind of an untried manager at the international level in Diego Coca. So he's actually Argentinian, and recently has coached a lot of club teams in Mexico. So recently coached Tigres Uano in Mexico and Atlas in Mexico. He's also coached some teams in Argentina, and but no experience at the international level. He was a professional player from 1990 to 2006, but didn't earn any international caps. And he is 51 years old. No, yeah, 51 years old, Diego Coca. So very tough job for him. It's difficult to kind of win the admiration of the Mexican fans. And I got to say, I think he has a bit of a weaker team to do it with than is usual with Mexico, but that's just speculation. Okay, let's move on to goalkeepers then. And we have a definite, we don't have any definite candidates there. We have a likely candidate in Carlos Acevedo. So Carlos Acevedo has been Carlos is 27 years old, but he's only been with Mexico since 2021, and he has 6 caps with them and plays for Santos Laguna in Mexico. And we consider him likely because he started 2 of their 3 games since the 22 World Cup and was on the bench for the other. So we don't have a lot of evidence to go on, but that's what it looks like from the vantage point we had now. You're probably expecting me to say Guillermo Ochoa, or Ochoa, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, as a definite candidate, but in fact we only have him as a possible candidate. So Guillermo Ochoa, a real veteran with the team, but he is 37 years old now, and he's been with Mexico since 2005 and has a whopping 136 caps. And he recently, last year in 2022, moved to Salernitana in Italy. He had been playing for Club America in Mexico before that. So kind of jumps from Mexico back to Europe there. And of course, I won't go through the many tournaments he's played since the Olympics in 2004. We'll just kind of focus on the last two tournaments. So he was not selected for the Gold Cup squad because he was preferred for the Olympic squad in 2021. So wasn't a starter in that Gold Cup, but was in the 2019 Gold Cup, and really is their starter, having started in the 2018 and 2022 World Cups. However, he has not appeared for the national team since the 2022 World Cup. So we're wondering, is he retired or is he just taking a rest? We really need to wait until the June information to see what that is. At 37 years old, it is possible that he's retired. Another possible candidate is Rodolfo Cota. Rodolfo Cota is 35 years old, and he has been with Mexico since 2017, but only 8 caps for them, and he plays for Leon in Mexico. So for the 2021 Gold Cup and the 2022 World Cup, he was on the roster, but he was a backup keeper on the bench, and he last appeared also during the 2022 World Cup. So a bit of doubt over him too, and 35. Not too old for a goalkeeper, but kind of getting up there. So age, it may be possible that he's retiring. We have Jose Antonio Rodriguez also as a possible candidate, and he is new to the team, even though he is 30 years old, and he doesn't have any caps for Mexico. He plays for Guadalajara in Mexico, and he got his first appearance, though, on the bench in March 2023. And though he didn't start any of the 3 games, he was on the bench for all 3 of them. So a bit unusual there, bringing in a 30-year-old new to the squad, but we do consider him a possible candidate. Alfredo Talavera is 40 years old, and he's been with Mexico since 2011 and has 39 caps and is with Juarez in Mexico. And, he's been part of the team for the last 11 years, involved in most of the tournaments. He was the starter in the 2021 Gold Cup while Ochoa was off with the Olympic team there. So he started and finished all games, and he was also on the bench for the World Cup 2022 squad. So I suspect he was like the second string keeper there. However, he also has not appeared for the national team since the 2022 World Cup. And because he's not the starter, we kind of put him as a possible but unlikely character or unlikely candidate here. And that's partly because of his age, 40 years old. We really think he may be moving into retirement because Mexico is going to have to bring in a couple of goalies, and they seem to be doing that to refresh this position with all the keepers getting older. Possible but unlikely, we also have Luis Malagon. Luis Malagon is 26 years old and has no caps for Mexico and plays for Club America. And he appeared on the bench 3 times in July 2021, then disappeared, but returned after a 7-month absence in April. So for their April game, against the USA there in 2023. But we don't consider him that serious a candidate. So possible but unlikely candidate. We also have Miguel Jimenez, who is 23 years old and has no caps for Mexico, plays for Guadalajara, and he hasn't appeared since June 2022. No, he was on the preliminary roster for the March 2023 game, so we kind of give him an outside chance of making the squad. Finally, we have a player who seems to be off the squad who is off the squad in David Ochoa, And he's been kind of vacillating back and forth between the Mexican team and the USA team, but he hasn't actually been selected for either. But most recently has thrown his allegiance back to the USA, and doesn't have any caps for them. So he looked a while ago like he could be a candidate for Mexico, but doesn't actually seem to be making it onto either team. So a lot of candidates there for goalkeeper, and I'm anxious to see in June what happens and get more light on this. It's a bit easier for the other positions because some of the veterans have been playing recently, and we begin with central defenders, and we have a couple of definite candidates here in Cesar Montes. Well, Cesar Montes has been with Mexico since 2017, and he has 35 caps and 1 goal, and is 26 years old and plays for Espanyol in Spain. So we'll just kind of look at the recent tournaments. He was not selected for the 2021 Gold Cup. He was on the preliminary squad but didn't make the final squad. However, he was selected for the World Cup in 2022 and was a starter in that cup. And since then, he started one of their 3 games, though he wasn't selected for the 2 others. I actually think we should move him down to likely, given that. I had put him as a definite because he was a starter. I think I'm going to move him down to likely because he's only been in one of the 3 games since the World Cup. We also have Hector Moreno. And we had him as a definite candidate also. So Hector Moreno is a real veteran with the team. He's been with them since 2007 and has 132 caps and 5 goals. But he is 35 years old. He plays for Monterrey in Mexico, and again has been part of many squads in his long time with the club. In the 2021 Gold Cup, he was the captain. I think that was because Guillermo Ochoa was not there. And he didn't appear in game 1 and 2, but he gained a starting position for the remaining 4 games. And then in the World Cup in 2022, he was a starter, starting and finishing all games there. Since then, he has started 1 of their 3 games, and he was injured for 1 and not selected for 1. I believe he's recovered from his injury now. In fact, he has, so that's not a factor. I'm going to leave him at the definite level, though, because he was injured for 1 game there, so I think he will be back. Yeah, it's a bit of a judgment call. If I truly had to justify, I probably couldn't defend myself properly, but let's call it an approximation, and then we'll see in June how right or wrong we were. Now, we have 2 likely candidates in Ernesto Araujo, and I'll begin with him. Nestor Araujo has been with Mexico since 2011, so another real veteran there. And just give me a moment. He is 31 years old and has 67 caps and 3 goals, and he plays for Club America in Mexico since 2022. And again, a lot of tournaments under his belt, but in 2021 Gold Cup, he was a starter for most of the games there. However, in the 2022 World Cup, he was a sub, only appearing in game 2, although he did start and finish that game. And like the other candidates, he has started 1 of the 3 games since the 2022 World Cup, but he was on the bench for the other 2, on the bench for the 2 Nations League games there. So we consider him likely. Nestor Araujo. Also likely is Israel Reyes. He has been with Mexico since 2021 and has 7 caps and 2 goals, and is 23 years old. And he plays for Puebla in Mexico. and he doesn't have any experience at the tournament level, so he was not even selected for the preliminary squad for the 2022 World Cup. But he did, since then, start 2 of their 3 games since the 2022 World Cup, and wasn't selected for the other, but was a starter in 2 of those games. So new to the squad, but we think that recent experience makes him a likely candidate. Next is Johan Vasquez, a possible candidate. And Johan Vasquez is has been with Mexico since 2019 and has 8 caps and 1 goal, and is 24 years old. And he plays for Genoa in Italy, though he was loaned to Cremonese in Italy in 2022-23. He was on the roster for the 2022 World Cup, and I'm jumping ahead of myself. I should say first, he was not selected for the 2021 Gold Cup. He was selected for the preliminary squad, but didn't make the final squad. But he was selected for the World Cup, but on the bench for the whole time. So since then, he has started 1 of their 3 games since the World Cup, and was on the bench for 1 other, and then not selected for the 3rd of those. So a possible candidate there. Also possible is Victor Guzman. Victor Guzman is, new to the team since 2021. He has 1 cap, and sorry, I'm just looking up his age here. He's 21 years old, and 1 cap and 0 goals. He plays for Monterrey in Mexico. So he first appeared on the bench in October 2021. And then he returned after an 18-month absence for the most recent game in April against the USA, where he was a starter. So we're not really sure what that means, but when a player comes in suddenly at the end, we usually put them at the possible level. And we'll have to see again in June how that turns out. Finally, we have an outside candidate, possible but unlikely candidate, Gilberto Silva. So, Gilberto Sepulveda, who is 24 years old and has been with Mexico since 2020 and has 7 caps. So he was actually on the roster for the 2021 Gold Cup, just as a sub. He subbed into 2 games, but then he was not selected even for the preliminary squad for the 2022 World Cup. But he had returned after an 16-month absence in March of 2023 and didn't start any of the remaining 3 games, but he was on the bench for 2 of them. So he looks like he's still under consideration for Mexico, but kind of low down on the pecking order there. All right, that brings us to the end of central defenders, and we move on to left backs. So a definite candidate is Jesus Gallardo. Jesus Gallardo is a veteran with the team. Well, no, since 2016. He's a veteran in terms of caps, though. He has 85 caps and just the 1 goal. And he's 28 years old, so still got a few years left in him. And Jesus Gallardo plays for Monterrey in Mexico since 2018. But he's really worked his way as a starter into the team. Having said that, I look and see that he was just a sub, started as a sub in the 2021 Gold Cup. He had actually been a starter in previous tournaments, including the 2018 World Cup, but started as a sub in the 2021 Gold Cup, but kind of resumed his starting position from game 2 onward there, and then a starter in the 2022 World Cup also. And he started 2 of their 3 games since the World Cup in 2022 and was not selected for 1 other. So still active after the World Cup, and we consider him a definite candidate there, probably the starter. We have a likely candidate in Gerardo Arteaga. So Gerardo Arteaga has been with Mexico since 2018 and has 18 caps and 1 goal, and is 24 years old, playing for Genk in Belgium since 2020. So he was not selected for the Gold Cup in 2021. Was selected for the preliminary squad, but that preliminary squad had 60 players on it. So not a huge achievement to make it to the preliminary squad, and not selected for the finals there. But he was selected for the World Cup in 2022, although just on the bench there, didn't see any action. Since then, he started one of their games since the World Cup, and was on the bench for one. I just want to kind of make sure on my information there. I'm going to take a sip of water while I'm checking. Okay, started one of their 5 games and was on the bench, and then not selected for the other game. So we consider him a likely candidate, though, because he was selected for the World Cup and has played since. The final candidate there is in the possible but unlikely category, and it's Jesus Alberto Angulo. So Jesus Alberto Angulo has been with the team since 2018 and has 15 caps and is 25 years old, and he plays for Tigres in Mexico since 2022. And he hasn't been selected for any squads. He wasn't selected for the 2021 Gold Cup. Instead, he was chosen for the Olympic squad that year. And for the 2022 World Cup, he made the 31-man preliminary squad, but didn't make the final cut. And since the World Cup, he was subbed into one of those 3 games, but not selected for 2 others. So we kind of consider him on the outside there, and possible but unlikely. Okay, moving on to right backs, we have as a likely candidate, Kevin Alvarado. So Kevin Alvarez. Kevin Alvarez is 24 years old, and he's been with Mexico since 2021, and he has 13 caps and 1 goal. Currently playing for Pachuca in Mexico, and has done so since 2018. So the Gold Cup in 2021 was his first tournament. He was on the roster, but saw no action there. And he was also selected for the World Cup, Kevin Alvarez, and he started just game 2 there, as well as subbing into game 3. So not a starter, but did start a game. Since the World Cup, he has started one of their 3 games, and he was on the bench for 1 other and not selected for the other. So we consider him a likely candidate. And then we have 2 candidates in the possible category. The first one is Julian Araujo. So Julian Araujo has been with Mexico since 2021, so a fairly new player there. And he is 21 years old and has 6 caps and no goals. He actually was eligible for the USA and did play 1 cap for them in the lead up to the 2021 Gold Cup, but switched his allegiance to Mexico after that. But he hasn't played in any tournaments. I think the reason he's a possible candidate here is because he does play for Barcelona B in Spain, Barcelona's B team. So that was a big move for him recently in 2023 from the LA Galaxy in the USA. So really his club affiliation increasing his potential in our opinion there. And since the 2022 World Cup, he started one of their 3 games and was subbed in for 2 others. So we think they're kind of eyeing him as a candidate. Perhaps will become a bigger name in the future, but we'll see if he makes the World Cup. The Gold Cup. The other possible candidate is Jorge Sanchez. And I'm a bit surprised he's just at the possible level here. We'll see after we read through the data whether we should move him up. But Sanchez is has been with the team since 2019 and has 29 caps and 1 goal at just 23 years old. And he plays for Ajax in the Netherlands, so since 2022. So he also was selected for the Gold Cup was not selected for the Gold Cup, was selected for the Olympic squad in the 2021 Gold Cup. And I got to say, I'm not sure which tournament was more important to them, because they seem to place a lot of value using a lot of their best young players for that Olympic squad. So anyway, not part of the Gold Cup in 2021, but was a starter in the World Cup in 2022, starting games 1 and 3, but he didn't appear in game 2. So since then, he started one of their 3 games since the 2022 World Cup, and he was not selected for 2 others. So I'm actually going to move him up to a likely candidate. I actually consider him more likely than Kevin Alvarez there. But again, we'll have to wait until June to get a clearer picture on these players. Other possible right backs, or actually not possible, but seems to be off the squad, is Emilio Lara. So he's a young player with Club America, last appeared for the team in November 2022. So we won't go into too much detail on him because he's unlikely to make the squad, or even less than unlikely. Also seemingly off the squad is Julio Cesar Dominguez. So he's a veteran with the squad. He's been with Cruz Azul in Mexico since 2006. So almost 17 years there. He's been on and off the team. He's suffered several lengthy absences, but he did last appear for the national team in June 2022. But probably a bit too old for the Mexican squad now, so seemingly off the squad. But again, since he's kind of reappeared 3 times already, there's always a chance he might pop up again. Okay, we'll move on to the midfield now, and we begin with defensive midfielders. And we actually only have one. And what we're going to find with Mexico is they all seem to be coded as central midfielders. And so they don't have a lot of left and right and defensive and attacking midfielders. So probably the players in the central midfield will be used in those various roles. And now I've lost my place on my list. Okay, I got it back. So for defensive midfielders, we only have one possible but unlikely candidate in Aldo Roca. So he doesn't have any caps for the squad and is 29 years old, plays for Atlas in Mexico. However, he did pop up on the bench in their most recent game, the friendly against USA in April. So we have to kind of at least add him to the list. But that's the first appearance I've seen from him actually over all the years. So we move on to central midfielders, and we have a long list here, beginning with two definite candidates. The first one, Luis Chavez. Well, Luis Chavez has been with Mexico. He's fairly new to Mexico since 2022, even though he is 27 years old. But since then, he's really made his way into the squad with 16 caps and 1 goal. And he plays for Pachuca in Mexico, his second spell with them since 2019. And he was selected for the preliminary squad, that big preliminary squad for the 2021 Gold Cup, but he didn't make the cut to 45 players, so kind of cut in the first slashing of the team down. However, he was a starter in the 2022 World Cup, so really worked his way in quickly there and scored a wonderful free kick in that cup. And since then has started 2 of their 3 games since the World Cup. Not selected for the other one, but we think he's made his way into a definite candidate position, at least for being on the team. We're not really separating starters and substitutes here. We may do that in the second half of the June podcast. here. So the second definite candidate is Carlos Alberto Rodriguez. And Carlos Alberto Rodriguez has been with the team since 2019. And has 43 caps and no goals, so perhaps more of a defensive midfielder there. And he is 26 years old, and he plays for Cruz Azul in Mexico since 2022. So even though he was a starter in the 2019 Gold Cup, he was not selected for the 2021 Gold Cup, and was on that big preliminary squad but didn't make the final cut. But he was selected for the 2022 World Cup. So Carlos Rodriguez, a sub in there, coming into 2 games in the World Cup. And since then, he has started one of their 3 games and subbed in for another and is on the bench for the other. So actually not many players have been called up for all 3 games since the World Cup. So that's part of the reason we consider him a definite candidate. Having said all that, I'm tempted to put him down to likely, but I'm going to go with my original assessments here. As a likely candidate, we have Hector Herrera. So Hector Herrera, a real veteran with the team, of course, and he is 33 years old and has been with Mexico since 2012 and amassed 105 caps and 10 goals. So recently became a Centurion for Mexico, and he plays for Houston Dynamo since 2022. He was with Atletico Madrid before that, and has been through many tournaments with Mexico, but we'll just cover the last 2. And in the 2021 Gold Cup, he was a starter, started all 6 games there, and very important in that game. I think, anyway, I'm not going to get into the details here, except to say he scored a late winning goal over Canada. That's what's been on my mind. I can't get it out of my head. Okay, he was also a starter in the 2022 World Cup, just for games 1 and 2 there, and not for game 3. And he hasn't appeared since then in any of the 3 games since then. So, I mean, we consider him likely because he's a veteran and has been a starter for such a long time. 33 years old is not that old, but not showing up since the World Cup gives us pause. So we move him to likely. Edson Alvarez, also a likely candidate here. So Edson Alvarez has been with Mexico since 2017 and is 25 years old, but has 62 caps and 2 goals. So that's quite a lot in the time that he's been there. And he also plays for Ajax in the Netherlands, and he's been with them since 2019. So in the 2021 Gold Cup, he was a starter, started all 6 games, and also a starter in the 2022 World Cup. And since then started one of their 3 games, but not selected for 2 others. So yeah, we're not quite ready to say he's a definite candidate, but he's pretty close to it, Edson Alvarez. The third possible candidate is Orbelin Pineda. Orbelin Pineda actually kind of plays all over the field, so you never know where he's going to pop up. But he's been with Mexico since 2016 and has 52 caps and 7 goals and is 27 years old. And he is with Celta de Vigo in Spain since 2022, but he was loaned to AEK Athens in Greece for the 2023. Well, I don't know if it was the whole season, but over the course of those 2 years. Orbelin Pineda was a substitute at the beginning of the 2021 Gold Cup, but he subbed in to game 1 at halftime and then gained a starting position for the remaining 5 games. However, he was only a substitute in the 2022 World Cup and just appeared in 1 game there as a sub. And that was the last time he appeared for the squad. So again, a fairly important player for the squad. I'm tempted to say he's somewhere between possible and likely, but we'll stick with the likely for now. Our last likely candidate is Eric Sanchez, and keeping in mind these players may spread out all over the midfield, but they're just coded as central midfielders. Eric Sanchez has been with the team since 2021, so fairly new to the Mexican squad. He's 23 years old and has 12 caps and 1 goal, and he was selected for the 2021 Gold Cup, where he was subbed into 2 games, but not selected for the 2022 World Cup. He was chosen for the 31-man preliminary squad, but didn't make the final cut. And since then, he's started 2 of their 3 games and not selected for 1 other. So still under consideration, even though he wasn't part of the World Cup squad, Eric Sanchez, and he's the 4th of our likely candidates. We now move on to the possible candidates, and I was a bit surprised that Luis Romo was just at this level, but maybe that's just in my head, because I don't think the evidence, I think the evidence doesn't support my feeling. Anyway, Luis Romo is 28 years old and he's been with Mexico since 2019. So a bit of a latecomer to the squad, but he has earned 29 caps and 1 goal, and he's with Monterrey in Mexico. He was part of the Olympic squad in 2021, so not part of the Gold Cup squad there. And for the World Cup in 2022, he was selected, but he was just on the bench the whole time. Since that time, he has started 1 of their 3 games, but was not selected for 2 others. So, yeah, hasn't firmly established himself in the squad, Luis Romo, so we have him as a possible candidate. The other possible candidate is Fernando Beltran. And Fernando Beltran has been with Mexico since 2020, even though he's 25 years old, so a bit of a latecomer to the squad too. He has far fewer caps than Romo, though. He has 10 caps and 0 goals since 2020, and he was selected for the 60-man preliminary squad for the 2021 Gold Cup, but didn't make the final cut, and not even selected for the preliminary squad for the 2022 World Cup, so has yet to participate in a tournament. And I think I didn't say he plays for Guadalajara in Mexico. So since the World Cup, though, he was subbed in for 1 of those 3 games and on the bench for the others, so still in and around the squad, and we have him as a possible candidate. Now we have 2 candidates who are possible but unlikely. The first of them is Alan Cervantes, and Alan Cervantes has been with the team since 2021 and has 5 caps and 0 goals, so not really working his way in, the 25-year-old. And he plays for Santos Laguna in Mexico since 2020. But he was on the 2021 Gold Cup squad, where he was a substitute, appearing only in 1 game there, but then not selected even for the preliminary squad in 2022. However, that's the 2022 World Cup. However, he did return after a 16-month absence in March to appear on the bench in their CONCACAF Nations League games, and actually was subbed into the first game. So he never did appear fully on the bench, but then not selected for the following 2 matches. So a brief reappearance for Alan Cervantes, causing us to think that he's a possible but unlikely candidate. And then finally, among central midfielders is Marcel Ruiz, and he got his first cap in 2023, just recently, but he's 22 years old, so not very young. He plays for Toluca in Mexico, and he got his first cap in 1 of those 3 games after the World Cup. Not as a starter, but as a substitute, Marcel Ruiz. So again, possible but unlikely candidate just popping up right at the end there. All right, that is a long list of central midfielders, but as I've said, They do kind of cover some of the other positions, and we have a few for left midfielders, but none for right midfielders. So, someone like Hector Herrera will probably play on the right of midfielder there. And let's begin with the first candidate just at the possible level, and that's Eric Gutierrez. So Eric Gutierrez has been with the team since 2016 and has 36 caps and 1 goal and is 28 years old. And he plays for PSV Eindhoven in the Netherlands since 2018. So he's never really established himself into the squad. But in the 2021 Gold Cup, he was a starter, starting the first 3 games there, but then he lost his starting position. And in the World Cup in 2022, like all other tournaments he was in before that, he was only a substitute. So he appeared only in game 2 in the World Cup, although he did substitute in before halftime. So some field time at least. Since then, he started the first of their 3 games since the 2022 World Cup and was on the bench for one other. So that's why we consider him a possible candidate. If he does come up, he'll probably be not in the starting lineup, but we're not really judging that here. Another possible candidate is Diego Lainez. Diego Lainez has been with Mexico since 2018 and is 23 years old, and he has 24 caps and 3 goals. And he plays for Real Betis in Spain since 2019. He's never actually taken part in a tournament, though. He was on the preliminary squad for the 2021 Gold Cup and for the 2022 World Cup, but wasn't selected for either one. And since the 2022 World Cup, he was called up and subbed into 2 of the 3 games. So again, trouble making it onto the squad, but still in and around the system, and a consideration for this at the possible level. And then we have a couple of players who are seemingly off the squad. So Eric Aguirre. Eric Aguirre is not an old player. He's 24 years old, and he's been with Mexico since 2018 with 11 caps and 2 goals, and plays for Monterrey in Mexico. And he was part of the Olympic squad in 2021, so not the Gold Cup squad, but not selected for the World Cup squad, and in fact last appeared on the bench in June 22. So it looked like he was in and around, and he's young enough that he might come back into the picture. But in the recent picture, he seems to be off the squad. And then more definitely off the squad is Andres Guardado, the veteran, one of the most capped international players in the world, with 181 caps since his start in 2005. But he's 37 years old now, and he's still playing for Real Betis in Spain. But yeah, his age is kind of showing. He was the captain of the team for the 2019 Gold Cup and a starter, but then not selected for the Gold Cup in 2021, where he was on the preliminary squad but didn't make the final cut. But it was a bit of a surprise to see him selected for the 2022 World Cup. But he was he was not a starter in game 1, but he started game 2 and was subbed out at 42. So again, his age may be showing there. And hang on, I see he announced his retirement in May 2023. So I think what happened there was perhaps he was still making himself available to the squad, but wasn't selected for the March games or even for the April friendly against the USA. So announced his retirement in May of 2023. So Andres Guardado, I'm moving him actually down to the retired category there. Okay, well, we got a bit of a break here now because with a lot of candidates in each of the positions above, we have right midfielders where there are no candidates, and then we have left wingers where there are no candidates. So our last category in the midfielder covers right wingers, but we have several candidates there, and we begin with the likely candidate, Irving Lozano. Irving Lozano is 27 years old, but he has a lot of experience for the squad, 64 caps and 17 goals since his first in 2016. And he is with, he's a definite candidate. He is with Napoli in Italy since 2019. And he was a starter in the 2021 Gold Cup, but he had an injury just 18 minutes into the first game, which ended his tournament. So he was out for a while there, but was back in time for the World Cup where he started all three games. So a starter for Mexico. And he also started one of their three games since the 2022 World Cup, but not selected for the other two. Nevertheless, we do consider him a definite candidate at this point. And the next one is Uriel Antuna, who we consider a likely candidate. Uriel Antuna has been with Mexico since 2019 and is 25 years old. And he is also fairly experienced at 44 caps and 11 goals. And he's with Cruz Azul in Mexico since 2022. Another one of those players who was selected for the Olympic squad rather than the Gold Cup squad in 2021. And he was also chosen for the 2022 World Cup. And he subbed into all three games there. So not a starter, but consistently used as a substitute. After the World Cup, he started two of their three games and was on the bench for the other. So almost a definite candidate, I would say. But because he was a sub, we considered him likely. Jesus Manuel Corona, we consider possible at this point. I'll get to the reason why later. But just to introduce him, he is... has been with Mexico since 2014 and is 30 years old and has 71 caps and 10 goals. And he's with Sevilla in Spain, having been with Porto in Portugal since then. So a top-class player. But was a starter in the 2021 Gold Cup, but for the 2022 World Cup, he was injured before the tournament. And so didn't appear in that tournament. He's back in action now. He began playing for his club in mid-May, so just recently, although he was never more than a substitute up until now. So kind of recovering, I suppose, getting his fitness back. So technically, Jesus Manuel Corona last appeared for the national team in June 2022. So we're not really sure what his status is, but he's a very popular player. And, you know, given his club affiliations, probably a starter if he's fit. But we'll have to update his situation in June. I'm assuming that they didn't really want to risk playing him for the April, or maybe he wasn't fit for the April friendly, but they don't want to risk playing him for his club there. All right, now we have four candidates who are at the possible but unlikely level. The first of them is Arturo Gonzalez, sometimes called Alfonso Gonzalez, and he's been with Mexico since 2014, but has only earned 4 caps for them in that time. He is 28 years old and plays for Monterrey in Mexico. So he's never been part of a tournament there. And he returned actually after a 16-month absence in March, where he appeared on the bench. There. So still kind of in the system, but he was off the team for more than 7 years. At one point, I think that was after the 2016 Copa America Centenario. But anyway, recently come back to the team, but not doesn't look like a big part of it. The next one is Oziel Herrera. So he is new to the team since 2023, got his first cap in 2023 and is 22 years old, playing for Atlas in Mexico. So he got his first and only appearance in that April 2023 friendly with USA. So hard to say. Sometimes when they come in at the end like that, they do make the team, but we're saying he's a possible but unlikely candidate at this point. The next one is, I think actually that is the only two candidates there. I thought there were four, but I made a mistake. So that's it for right wingers and also for the midfield. And we move on to the forward line. We start with attacking midfielders there. But again, they don't have many. So maybe the central midfielders also fill this role. I know Pineda kind of moves around the field a lot, and maybe used in this position too. But we do have Efren Alvarez, but only as a possible but unlikely candidate. And he's been with Mexico since 2021 and is just 20 years old with 4 caps and 0 goals. And he plays for LA Galaxy in the USA. In fact, he was born in the USA. But he was part of the team for the 2021 Gold Cup, where he was subbed into 2 games, but then not selected for the 2022 World Cup. So he was actually off the team for 16 months, but he returned for that friendly against the USA in April 2023. So kind of still in and about. The next one, also possible but unlikely, is Sebastian Cordova. So he has been with Mexico since 2019 and is 26 years old. With 14 caps and 3 goals, and he plays for Tigres Juano in Mexico, so probably played under the new manager there. He's been there since 2022. Sebastian Cordova was not part of the Gold Cup squad in 2021, but was part of the Olympic squad that summer. And as far as the 2022 World Cup went, he wasn't selected even for the 31-man preliminary squad. So he also returned from an absence after 9 months, and he was on the bench for one of the 3 games that they played. So like Efren Alvarez, still kind of in the picture, but not really called up that much. Finally, we have a player who seems to be off the squad, Marcelo Flores. He's actually new with Mexico since 2021, and he has 3 caps and is 20 years old. I added him to the list because he may be an interesting up-and-coming candidate. He's on the roster for Arsenal in England since 2022 and was loaned to Real Oviedo in Spain this last season. So he was born in Canada and hasn't been a part of the of any tournaments, I should say. Excuse me. He did miss a penalty in qualifying in a game at home to Suriname, just 3 minutes into his 9-minute appearance as a substitute. So kind of curious why they offered him a penalty. I think that was his 2nd or 3rd game. But he last appeared for the national team in June 2022. So it seems to be off the squad for the time being, but we may see him in the future, Marcelo Flores. We move on to secondary strikers. We only have one name in this position, and it's Henry Martin. We consider him a likely candidate. Henry Martin has been with Mexico since 2015. Had a bit of trouble getting into the team at first, but is now making his way in. But I'll finish his biographical details. He is 30 years old and has 31 caps and 7 goals, and is with Club America in Mexico since 2018. So as I said, kind of had trouble getting into the team. Was selected for the 60-man preliminary squad for the Gold Cup in 2021, but didn't make the final cut. Instead, he was I guess, one of the overage players on the Olympic squad, like Guillermo Ochoa there. But he was selected for the World Cup in 2022, Henry Martin. So he started games 1 and 3 in the World Cup, but didn't appear in game 2. And as far as his appearances since then, he started one of their 3 games since the 2022 World Cup, but wasn't selected for the other 2. So we have him as a likely candidate there. And now we move on to the forward line, and we have a likely candidate there in Alexis Vega. So Alexis Vega has been with Mexico since 2019 and is 25 years old with 27 caps and 1 goal, and plays for Guadalajara in Mexico. So his first tournament was the 2019 Gold Cup, where he was a substitute. And but he was not selected for the Gold Cup in 2021, rather part of the Olympic squad. And by the time the World Cup came around in 2022, he was a starter in that tournament, starting all 3 games there. That's why we have him as a likely candidate here. And he also started one of the 3 games since the 2022 World Cup, although he wasn't selected for the 2 others. So a likely candidate in Alexis Vega. We have a possible candidate in Roberto Alvarado, and he has been with Mexico since 2018, and he has 36 caps and 4 goals at 24 years old, so playing quite a bit for Mexico. He plays for Guadalajara in Mexico, and in 2021, he was on the preliminary squad for the Gold Cup, having been a starter in the 2019 Gold Cup. But he didn't make the cut in 2021, and he was selected for the World Cup in 2022, but he appeared only in 1 game as a substitute there. And since then, he started one of their 3 games, and has been on the bench for 1 and not selected for another. So, yeah, not kind of fully in the squad yet, but we consider him a possible candidate for this Gold Cup. Next, we have Santiago Jimenez as a possible candidate. And Santiago Jimenez has been with Mexico now since 2021. And he's just 22 years old, but has 10 caps and 2 goals. So, he was on the preliminary squad, the 31-man preliminary squad for the World Cup, but didn't make the final cut. And since then, he has started one of their 3 games since the World Cup, and was on the bench for 1 other. So he was chosen for the Nations League games there, so we consider him a possible candidate. Next, another possible candidate, and a much more familiar face in Raul Jimenez. And Raul Jimenez has been with Mexico since 2013 and is 32 years old now. He recently passed the centurion mark, so has 103 caps and 30 goals, and has been with Wolverhampton in England since 2019. He was with Benfica before that in Portugal, and has been a part of many tournaments, but we're just focusing on the recent ones. After starting in the 2019 Gold Cup, he didn't appear in the 2021 Gold Cup. It was a bit unclear, actually, why he was not part of that squad. It was blamed on injury. Now, I can't remember if his fractured skull injury was before that or after that. So maybe I should look into that and update it in the June podcast. Anyway, it doesn't matter much. He's back now. Probably not as good as he has been before the skull injury there. For the World Cup, he was selected, but he was subbed into all 3 games there. And he since has started none of their games since the World Cup, but he was subbed in for 1. So we have Raul Jimenez as a possible candidate here. Oh, and our last possible candidate is Roberto de la Rosa. Roberto de la Rosa is brand new to the team. He got his first cap in April 2023. And Yeah, he started that game. It must be in March because I actually have him starting one game and on the bench for one game. So, oh, I guess maybe the game he started was the May friendly against Mexico, but he was also called up for the CONCACAF games in March. So he's with Pachuca in Mexico, and we have him as a possible candidate because players who come in at the in the later stages like that, it's hard to tell if they're going to make the team. We have a possible but unlikely candidate in Rogelio Funes Mores. Now, he had a very good 2021 Gold Cup, started all 6 games there and scored 3 goals. So it looked like he was going to be a key player for them. But in the 2022 Gold Cup, he was only a substitute and just subbed in briefly to 1 game. So only played about 5 minutes in that cup, and that was the last time he appeared for the national team. So he, after looking so good in the Gold Cup, there just seems to be kind of on his way out of the team here. He has played for Monterrey in Mexico since 2015 and was also available for Argentina. And his brother actually plays for the Argentina national team too. And then we have a couple of candidates who seem to be off the squad, and Eduardo Aguirre is one of them. So he last played for Mexico in 2022, was part of the Olympic squad, but not the World Cup squad, and last played for the national team in September 2022. So out of the picture, at least recently. But young enough that he can make his way back into the picture because he's only 24 years old. Finally, Angel Zaldivar. Angel Zaldivar is 29 years old and was with the team from 2016 to 18, where he got 6 caps, and then has recently returned after a 4-year absence to appear, but that was in September 2022 and just an appearance on the bench, and he hasn't been called up since then, so highly unlikely that he will be called. Okay, well, that's a huge squad for Mexico, and that brings us to the end of part 1, which we're doing here in May. So when we return, which will be immediately from your perspective, it'll be June, and we will have the final squad selection before us, so we can tell you which of these players will be playing in the Gold Cup and which will be left out. So we'll see you then. It's June, and welcome back to those of you who are coming from the part 1 of the media cast, and welcome anew to those of you joining us for the short version. So I will just kind of summarize what we did in the short version for those people. We basically made a list of candidates for Mexico based on mostly on recent players. And we categorized them into their positions and also into their likelihood of making the squad. So in this podcast, now that we have the preliminary and the final squads, we're going to go through that list again and tell you which ones made it to the preliminary or the final or not at all squad. In the meantime, between the part 1 of this podcast and part 2, Mexico lost to USA in the semifinals, a pretty rough game where they suffered 2 red cards and a 3-0 humiliation at the hands of USA. They did win the third place match over Panama, 1-0. But as a result of that, they fired their manager. So we might as well jump up to the manager here and see who it was. It was a new manager. He had come in for Gerardo Martino recently, and Diego Coca was the new manager. Apparently not that popular even before the game began, but certainly not that popular after. So they got rid of him, and they have brought in a new manager, so we will introduce him. He's actually an ex-player. He's actually an ex-player for Mexico, and his name is Jaime Lozano, or Jaime Lozano, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And he played for Mexico from 2000 to 2008, earning 33 caps and scoring 12 goals. He was part of the Copa America 2004 squad, but not selected for the 2006 Gold Cup. Apparently, EA Sports was upset about that because they had used his image. It was apparently a bit of a surprise that he wasn't selected, but he came back for the 2007 Gold Cup. And as a manager, this is his first national team appointment. Before this, he was with Necaxa in Mexico, and also managed the Mexican under-23 national team from 2018 to 21. So he's just an interim manager here. I'll call him Jaime Lozano, and he will lead Mexico through this Gold Cup. And I'll say at the outset that Mexico have pretty much sent an A squad. There are a couple of players, a couple of kind of important players who are missing, but I'm not sure that that is through non-selection or whether they're being rested. But most of the team that played in the 2022 World Cup is here, and let's begin. Well, we had our doubts about Guillermo Ochoa because he hadn't played since the World Cup, but he did play in those Nations League games, and he is coming to this tournament. So we had him as just a possible candidate because he hadn't played since the World Cup, but he is going to be the keeper for the Cup. We had a keeper ahead of him, Carlos Acevedo, as a likely candidate, and that was because he had started games since the World Cup. He didn't make the squad, though. He was only named to the 40-man preliminary squad. And it's different keepers. Also not making the squad is our other possible candidate, Rodolfo Cota, and he didn't even make the preliminary squad. However, the other possible candidate, Jose Antonio Rodriguez, did make the final squad. We had two possible but unlikely candidates in Alfredo Talavera, and he didn't make the preliminary squad. But the other one, Luis Malagon, made the final squad. So those are the three keepers: Guillermo Ochoa, Jose Antonio Rodriguez, and Luis Malagon. We're guessing Ochoa will be the starter there. Our candidate... no, I'm going to move on. Okay. To defenders. There were a couple of other names there, but they didn't make the preliminary squad. Okay, let's move on to central defenders. And we had Hector Moreno as a definite candidate, but he seems to be either retired or being rested because he was in the World Cup as a starter there. But he didn't even make the preliminary squad, but he is 35 years old, so he is perhaps retiring from the team. Let me see when he last appeared. Well, he did actually appear after the World Cup, and he was injured for one game, so I wonder if that played a role. Anyway, definite candidate Hector Moreno, not selected even for the preliminary squad, but we move on to likely candidates. I think I actually had Cesar Montes as definite, and we moved him down to likely in part one. Either way, he is selected for the final squad, Cesar Montes. However, another likely candidate, Nestor Araujo, only selected for the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. And finally, Israel Reyes, coming into the picture. He started both games in the Nations League finals there. And Ismael Reyes selected to the Gold Cup squad also. We had a possible candidate in Johan Vasquez, and he made it to the squad, as did Victor Guzman, another possible candidate. And finally, we had the possible but unlikely Gilberto Sepulveda, and he only made the preliminary squad, Gilberto Sepulveda. So our central defenders are Cesar Montes, Israel Reyes, Johan Vasquez, and Victor Guzman. Moving on to left back, we had a definite candidate in Jesus Gallardo, and he is selected to the squad. He's so steady for Mexico, always there. He scored the goal against Panama to win that game, and he is selected for this squad. We had a likely candidate in Gerardo Arteaga, and he is selected for the squad as well, even though he did get a red card there in that game against USA, and I wonder if he'll be serving a suspension for the first game there, but he is selected for the squad. And Jesus Alberto Angulo we had as a possible but unlikely candidate, and he made the preliminary squad but not the final squad. Moving over to right back, we had two likely candidates. The first was Kelvin Alvarez, but he only made the preliminary squad. And the other one was Jorge Sanchez, and he made the final squad. I think we originally had Jorge Sanchez as possible because he only started one of their 3 games since the World Cup, but we maybe moved him up to likely. In my mind, he would be more likely. And sure enough, he's made the squad. We had a possible candidate in Julian Araujo, and he did make the squad too. So that's not Nestor Araujo, but Julian Araujo making it to the Gold Cup. And then we had 2 players who were seemingly off the squad, Emilio Lara and Julio Cesar Dominguez, and both do seem to be off the squad as they weren't selected for the preliminary squad. We move on to midfielders, and we had only one defensive midfielder, or only one player coded as a defensive midfielder, and even that was at the possible but unlikely level, and it was Aldo Rocha. And Aldo Rocha was selected for the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. Central midfielders, we had several definite and likely candidates, so we'll deal with the definite first. Luis Chavez and Carlos Alberto Rodriguez, both of them selected for the Gold Cup. And among the 4 likely candidates, there was Hector Herrera, who, again, kind of like Ochoa, hadn't appeared since the World Cup, but kind of hard to imagine a Mexican midfield without Herrera. But he is not even selected for the preliminary squad. He is 33 years old, and he did start in the World Cup. So he actually started games 1 and 2, but didn't appear in game 3 there. So I wonder if he was drifting off the team a little bit. Anyway, Hector Herrera not selected even for the preliminary squad. However, the other 3 candidates were, so Edson Alvarez, going to be at the Gold Cup, Orbelin Pineda, the roaming Orbelin Pineda. I kind of mentioned that in the first part of the podcast, how he roams around the field, and sure enough, he started as a forward in those. I think it was the first of those Nations League final games against USA. So the roving Orbelin Pineda. And finally, Eric Sanchez, the last likely candidate, also made it to the squad. As too did possible candidate Luis Romo. So a really stacked central midfield there, although they may play in other positions. We also had as possible Fernando Beltran, but Fernando Beltran just made the preliminary squad. And possible but unlikely candidate Alan Cervantes also made the preliminary squad, but not the other possible but unlikely candidate Marcel Ruiz, not making the squad at all. With left midfielders, we had 2 possible candidates, and both of them made it to the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. So Eric Gutierrez and Diego Lainez, both of them not coming to the Gold Cup, just on the preliminary squad there. We also had a player who seemed to be off the squad and proved to be so in Eric Aguirre, not selected even for the preliminary squad. And Andres Guardado, we had him as retired, but there was always a chance of him coming back because he has done so before, but not selected for the preliminary squad even. Over to right midfielders and left wingers. We have no players coded as either. Maybe that explains why the central midfield has so many players. And we move on to right winger Irving Lozano, and we had him as a definite candidate, but on June 8th of this year, he suffered a knee injury and is out for the tournament. So a big loss to them there, Irving Lozano. And that makes room for maybe some of the other players. Uriel Antuna, our likely candidate, was selected for the squad. But I was expecting Jesus Manuel Corona to be there because he missed the World Cup due to injury. And I guess maybe it's the injury that's still a problem. He did begin playing for his club in mid-May, which is what made me think he would make this tournament. But he never came on as anything more than a substitute until the end of the season, so perhaps still recovering. Anyway, Jesus Manuel Corona just named to the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. Also injured, but he was a possible but unlikely candidate anyway, was Arturo Gonzalez, and he was out with a knee injury from early June. So whether he was a serious consideration, we'll never know, because the injury makes the decision for the manager. And yes, with all of those players out, that makes room for a player who we had as possible but unlikely, and it's Oziel Herrera. So Oziel Herrera, I think he actually started he did start one of the Panama game in the finals there. So getting a good chance is Oziel Herrera, and we move on to forwards. So at attacking midfield, we only have two players at the possible but unlikely level, and one who seems to be off the squad. The first is Efrain Alvarez, as possible but unlikely. He was not named even to the preliminary squad. But the other one, Sebastian Cordova, not only made the preliminary squad, but the final squad too. So a bit of a surprise there. And finally, Marcelo Flores, seemingly off the squad. Further evidence of that in that he didn't make the preliminary squad either. We have a secondary striker in Henry Martin, but he actually seems to be playing more as an out-and-out forward now. He is selected for the squad, and he started that first game against USA for the final. So really making his way into the first team is Henry Martin. Alex Vega is the first of our forwards, and we had him at the likely level. However, he is also out with injury, a knee injury, and I suspect that's very recent because he was actually on the bench for the Nations League final games there. So whatever happened, obviously it didn't happen to him during those games. So perhaps in practice, it's a bit curious. Nevertheless, Alexis Vega flagged as injured and out of this cup. We had four possible candidates. First was Roberto Alvarado, and he did make the final squad, and so did the second one, Santiago Jimenez. However, Raul Jimenez and Roberto de la Rosa, the other possible candidate, only made it to the preliminary squad there. Okay, and finally, possible but unlikely, Rogelio Funes Mores, who did quite well in the 2021 Gold Cup, is off the squad. He was selected for the World Cup squad, but appeared only briefly and didn't play after that. So that's why we had him as possible but unlikely. And sure enough, not even selected for the preliminary squad. So I'm not sure what's going on with him. And then we had two players who seemed to be off the squad, Eduardo Aguirre and Angel Zaldivar, and neither of them made the preliminary squad. So that is the squad as it looks. And we're going to give a couple of summaries here. And the first one will be notable non-selections. And we'll go through it. We have Carlos Acevedo. We had him as likely for a goalkeeper, but no, he was not selected. We'll see that an unexpected selection was made instead. Hector Moreno, we had him as a definite central defender, but he is not even on the preliminary squad. Araujo Nestor was on the preliminary squad. We considered that central defender kind of slash right back, Nestor Araujo, to be a likely candidate, but he was not selected, so a bit surprising. Also, right back Kevin Alvarez, likely candidate who was just selected for the preliminary squad, like Nestor Araujo. In the midfield, Hector Herrera was not even selected for the preliminary squad. So you might argue it's a B team, or you know, headed towards a B team without some of these big players there, like Hector Moreno and Hector Herrera. But those players are aging, so I wonder if they're kind of on their way out. Jesus Manuel Corona not being selected also gives me a bit of pause, but I'm not quite ready to say this is a B team. I think there are probably other reasons these players are not selected. Raul Jimenez, we only had as a possible candidate, actually, just like Jesus Manuel Corona. But it is still a bit surprising that neither of those were selected. So were not selected. So I'll add them on this notable non-selections list. Okay, we move on to surprise inclusions. And there we have goalkeeper Luis Malagón. So basically, he took the place of Carlos Acevedo, and we had him as a possible but unlikely candidate. But there he is at the Gold Cup. Osiel Herrera, a right winger, maybe filling in for some players that are missing there, but getting a good chance because we had him as possible but unlikely. Osiel Herrera. And finally, Sebastian Cordova, possible but unlikely attacking midfielder, but did make the squad. They were a bit thin in that position also. All right, and then we'll take a look at new players. Oh, I actually have it there on the graphic there. The biggest surprise, manager Diego, what's his name? Coca. Diego Coca fired from the team after the USA debacle, and in comes interim manager Jaime Lozano. A couple of other new players too. Players that actually, most of the players on the preliminary squad had been on our radar, kind of on our soccer files on our files, but two players brand new to us, Omar Campos and Jesus Orozco. You know, so perhaps we'll see them down the road. And finally, I'll summarize on injuries. So Irving Lozano, a big loss to the team, dropped due to injury, a knee injury picked up in early June. And Alexis Vega also a bit mysteriously missing from the squad, also with a knee injury. Must have been picked up really recently. And then Arturo Gonzalez also injured, but he was not a strong candidate anyway. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the Mexico's players squad. And And just setting up the goodbye graphic there. And it is goodbye. We hope we see you for our next team or our next player media cast.